Hello, everyone. Welcome to AntKast by Ant Group. It's a podcast that brings you deep into conversations with global thinkers, innovators, and entrepreneurs on groundbreaking technology and how they're shaping our lives for better or for worse. I am the guest host of this episode. My name is Theodora Lau, and I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. Now, so much of our lives now involve the use of smartphones, with more and more services going digital. One of the contributing factors to this paradigm shift, obviously, is the humble QR code, which, with a quick scan from our mobile devices, can achieve a wide range of purposes, from displaying multimedia contents to ordering food at a restaurant. But the question is, how did this technology come about? And why are they becoming the global payment standard? What does the future hold for the QR code? To find out more, we have invited an expert on this topic and a good friend of mine, Richard Turrin. So welcome to AntKast, Richard.
Hi, Theo. Thank you so much for having me here. And it's wonderful to see you in person because Theo and I, for those who don't know it, we talk all the time on Twitter and on LinkedIn, but it's rare that we see each other face to face. So great to be here. And yes, QR codes. What a topic.
I know, right? Before we go there, though, Richard, can you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your journey and your two books?
Sure. I'm always happy to talk about me, but basically I was an investment banker until the global financial crisis hit in 2008. And I had been to Shanghai before, and in 2010, moved here with 2 duffel bags and said, hi, I live in Shanghai now, moving from my home in New York. And it's led to wonderful new careers at IBM, where I transitioned from doing computers and banking for banks, where I worked in structured credit and intersection of math, computers, and money. To doing it actually at IBM, and also a stint as an MBA school professor here for 3 years. So Shanghai's been wonderful for me, but what's really relevant for everyone out there is that I experienced Shanghai in 2010, which was a pre-WeChat Pay, pre-Alipay, pre-QR code China. So I got here before the transition, and then I lived through it to the current China, which is QR codes are simply everywhere. And, you know, it's really quite remarkable. But I feel privileged because I experienced a great transition that is in some ways really historic, from cash-based economy to the launch of Alipay, to a QR code-based, and it was dramatic, and that's really what inspired me to write my book, Cashless, was seeing this transition happen and wanting to share that with other people.
I love that story. And for those of you who had not seen Richard's book, you can see that right there on the screen. If you can actually see it on video, there is a QR code printed on that cover, which is really interesting amongst many of the different things that you have in your book. Can you tell us, though, you mentioned you experienced a transition of the city and the country, moving towards digital, moving towards adapting QR codes. What is so special about QR codes? And going back in history a little bit, who created it and why?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, most podcasts tend to focus on the latest and greatest AI, the new technology that's burning, cutting edge. And in fact, when we look at QR codes, we're looking at Japanese technology that was invented in 1994, 93. I got to check, by Denso. And it was originally industrial technology, meaning that it was to be put on boxes so that factories could keep track of stuff. They already had barcodes, which are nice, but they needed more data. So you take a barcode and you square it, right? You take it from this way to make it two directions, and you've got a QR code. And, it's really old school technology that is being reborn and reused in all these fabulous new ways. But that's sort of the irony of it all, is that it's really old technology that was at least one point in the West, when used for advertising and media, considered dead. I have a quote in Cashless where one of the great mobile marketing gurus of his time proclaimed, and he's a nice guy, and I won't even use his name, but I feel for him, because in the early thousands, he proclaimed, quote, "The QR code is dead." So, I'm sure you and I will have equally bad predictions for something somewhere, right? If you say a lot of stuff in public, but, so it's old tech from Japan. And the thing to understand is that it is tremendously useful because it creates this bridge from the physical world, where we don't need batteries, to the digital world. That's what we really need to think about. That's what it does that's so unique.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I did remember seeing quite a few QR code ads in the recent sports event in the United States. So it is far from dead. And I love how you were talking about bridging the two different modality, if you will. And you mentioned it has become, or has been, quite popular and commonplace in China as a payment method. Going back, how did that transition come about? Can you walk us through that? And in that particular instance, what are the benefits of using QR code for payments as opposed to the other methods that we use?
Yeah, so let's go to 2014. 2014 was a landmark year for mobile payments everywhere. Okay, so it was 2014 was actually the launch date for Apple Pay. And 2014 was the launch date for Alipay and WeChat Pay. So what you were looking at if you lived in China was a cash-bound environment where when I had to pay for apartment rent security deposits, I would actually go with a bag full of cash, big bricks of RMB, to pay for my rent security, and then by the time you got to 2017, 2018, everything was simply moved on to Alipay. And the reasons are simple. Payment on Alipay and WeChat is free and immediate. So there's no need to carry these bricks of money around anymore. And of course, there's no reason to fear for public safety or carrying money, right? So it just worked. It was a solution to a problem. Say, well, we don't have that problem in the West, and we don't need it. And the answer is, yes, you do have contactless payment in the West, and it's all dependent on you going near a machine. That's why they call it proximity payments. And QR codes, what they do is they have this wonderful ability to remove a machine. So you're living in a world right now in the West where you do, maybe if you have an iPhone or use Google Pay, do phone to machine transfer. And what QR codes allow us to do is to go from phone to piece of paper transfer, no machine. And that's that digital to physical link that is so important. And what it allows people to do is that even the most humble noodle shop, even the poorest of vendors, they can all participate in this new digital payment world because it is zero cost for them to use.
I had to chuckle because I just wrote the check this morning. So it is, there are different payment methods, right? Shall we say? And I think there are quite a few areas that I look on with amazement and, shall I say, a little jealousy that I wish we could do more of that, like what you do over there. Beyond China, where else do we see such vast adoption of QR code payments?
Yeah, it's becoming a global standard. So look, anyone who works or lives in Southeast Asia clearly knows that QR codes have migrated out of China, where they were first really used for payment, into most neighboring countries. Thailand, down in Singapore, Malaysia, we've all got QR code-based systems, and Philippines does with Gcash. So it's certainly becoming an Asian standard, but now we can look to Brazil and new PIX payment system, PIX, and that also has QR codes. And we can look to Mercado Libre, which is big all through South America, and they've got QR codes. So what you see is this migration to QR code on a global basis. And the reason is it simply works. Look, it's hard to explain, or it's hard to understand how expensive it is to maintain a point of sale device. Anybody listening from the EU or US says, I've got a card, and I swipe it or tap it or otherwise put it near that device. That device needs electricity. That device needs connectivity. That device connects to someplace. All of that costs money. So in China, China had plenty of debit card machines in pre-2014, but you had to pay money for a phone line. You had to pay all this stuff. So a small noodle shop couldn't do it. So now when you look at developing economies, whether they be Latin America, South America, or Southeast Asia, and you give people the ability to accept mobile payment at almost zero cost. Here, print out the QR code, paste it on the wall, and you're done. That's it. That's really a revolution in payment, a revolution for financial inclusion. It just works. And that's why we're going to see increasing use of QR codes. And what? Facebook Pay, now rebranded as Meta Pay, guess what? It uses QR codes. So they're here. They're not going anywhere. And I think long term, you're going to sort of see them win the NFC, near field communication, point of sale device versus QR code battle for what works at payment. NFC is going. QR code is going to win.
Now hold that thought for a second, because we are going to come back to that. But I feel like there's a theme in here. QR code is not dead. It's far from dead. Speaking of, you mentioned a few different regions just now when we were talking about adoption. The one area that is pretty interesting is Europe, because the European Payments Council recently just published a document called the Standardization of QR Codes for Mobile-Initiated SEPA Credit Transfer, which what they're trying to do is standardize a payee and a payer presented QR code for different payment contexts, P2P, B2B, consumer business, and business to consumer. I have to ask, it's about time. Why now?
Yeah, great question. Why now? Because we're looking at a digital euro being built by the European Central Bank. They're going to get a central bank digital currency. So standardization of payment through QR code and standardizing the codes will be critical, both for integrating many different European payment systems and for a future where Europe has a digital euro, which makes for a singular means of payment. So convenient for what you've got today, meaning we can take different payment systems that don't speak to one another and make them speak via QR code, and for a digital future. So it's really, it's a great move by the European Central Bank or the EU. And I love it. I think standardization is the way to go. And now, see, once we standardize Europe in one QR code system, then we can say, well, we can take Europe standard and we can make a bridge to China standard, to India standard, to Brazil's standard, and we can start to make these payment systems that are QR code based, but basically swipe once, work with one account anywhere on the planet. And that's the future. And that's where, the folks at Alipay Plus are really taking the world already. So it's really a fascinating, it's a great development, and it's fascinating to see this future instant payment world that we're looking to. And by the way, I want to make a shout out. There's a really wonderful publication, especially if you're in the EU, and that is there's a publication called Standardizing QR Code Payments in Europe, and it's by the Copenhagen Economics Company in conjunction with Ant Group, and it's really a great treatise on it's a long PPT, and it's just really great. It talks about what are the advantages to really standardizing QR codes, and it's basically a guideline to what your payment future is going to look like. So it's in your best interest to take a look. It's a lovely publication.
So just to make it work, and it's fast and it's easy and it's workable. I mean, that is the future where different payments across borders can work seamlessly. One of the favorite topics of mine is using technology for good. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier when it comes to financial inclusion, right? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts of when it comes to using QR code as a payment method. In what ways can it be a true enabler of financial inclusion, getting more people in the system and creating more opportunities for those who don't have it right now?
What we saw is that QR codes were critical because you could take that shopkeeper who really, and I have great pictures of this, a noodle shop. And, these are really humble places. A burner and a guy making noodles, and, he's got a blue piece of paper with the Alipay logo on it, and probably next to it another one with green with WeChat, and that's it. This guy is not going to have a point of sale device with NFC and electric, and doesn't exist. So what we saw was that QR codes were really a perfect way to bring people in, bring shopkeepers in, to make them included in a digital payment world that they would have been excluded from in the West. Say, what? Yeah, now let me explain. I said before that 2014 was a really big year. And I also stated that in 2014, Apple Pay was launched. Now, what happened with Apple Pay? In 2014, Steve Cook got on the stage and he said, Apple Pay is coming. It's wonderful. It's the future. You can be really cool and make payment with your phone. Problem was that on that same stage, he said, here is the new iPhone 6. And in order to use Apple Pay, you have to buy the new iPhone 6 because Apple Pay will not work with iPhone 3, 4, or 5 prior generations. So what you saw was pay to play. If you want to use this new digital technology, you have to buy the new phones. China payment platforms made their apps usable on the cheapest, worst cell phone or smartphone that would have been available in the 2014 marketplace. They tried to make it as inclusive as possible, as opposed to making it exclusive. So you've really got an example of how Apple Pay took a long time to catch on, and people don't realize your local coffee shop had to buy a new point of sale device or rent a new point of sale device, pay more money to use Apple Pay. It cost. That's why there was a slow ramp up, and you had to buy a new phone to use it. So there was, again, this ramp up. WeChat and Alipay both took China by storm because they cost nothing to use, and you needed no additional new technology to use. They were really fantastic at bringing inclusion to the entire society.
That is a wonderful example. It's been so long, I actually almost forgot about that. And you keep talking about noodle shop. Now you're gonna get me hungry. Um, so I'm
Yeah, right. I mean, there's one down the street that we should go together.
Yes, yes, it is still my hope that in the very near future we can actually sit down together and have a cup of coffee and chat, um, instead of through the screens. But I know that day will come soon. So let's go to NFC because you had mentioned it a little bit, and it is actually a very valid question when we look at the various payment methods, right? In Asia and Southeast Asia, you mentioned QR code is quite commonplace and quite popular. In other parts of the world, a lot of us have been using NFC or the near field communication as a payment method. Now, both of them do not require direct contact when it comes to paying, which is a plus, especially in the world that we are in right now. From your perspective, I'm curious to hear how would you compare these two technologies? You did make one prediction on the long-term viability of one versus the next, and I'll hold you to that. Why do you think that's the case?
Oh, that is a really good question. So basically, never. Oh, okay, so we live in what we call proximity payments, right? So proximity meaning how close can you make your phone? How proximal to the device that reads it can you get? And frankly, that's great technology. It works. I know it's what we've got. And I also know it's nice because it works with cards, and cards have use, and that's great. You card, you put it in your pocket, you're done. But in our ever-present digital future, what we do with QR codes is we make that distance even further. So you mentioned before you saw QR codes at sports arenas. And, we're seeing QR. So when I go to an event here in China, invariably on the stage, when I go to some sort of live event, invariably there's a stage and there's QR codes to ask questions. You type them in the QR codes. But QR codes allow you to get further away and disconnected. So if I want to make an entry payment, for example, say I'm going to a sports event and I'm outside or an event and I'm outside. They put up a big QR code. I make the payment. My screen flashes different color and I show it to the guy and I'm paid. It allows you to pay from physically further away. It requires zero technology for the user, for the payment receiver, other than posting that picture. It's just drop dead simple. And in that simplicity and in that removal of a point of sale system with electricity and everything else, it just makes it a breeze. So, you can really see it if you go to my coffee shop. And this is really the best example. The guy has his QR code up there and he's already on the next coffee. He told you that would be 50 RMB. He's already on the next order. You're swiping, you're paying. And when when he receives the payment, you can actually hear it. The cash register goes, received 50 RMB. So it allows for a faster throughput. It's just, it works better. And I apologize if that sounds harsh. And people are like, no, my card is the ultimate in payment. No, sorry. QR codes really do bring increased use, increased ease of use for both the shopkeeper and for the person, me, using it.
Elegance and simplicity. I think that's what I would call it.
Yeah, that's better than everything I just said in the last 2 minutes. So yeah, I agree with you. It's just elegant. It really is.
That's awesome. So, but what about what's next, right? In our space, we talk a lot about embedded finance, about being able to meet consumers where they are, whenever they are, and allow them to pay however they want it. And is something that's gaining popularity in various use cases. What role do you think QR codes will play in embedded finance?
They are everything. They're key. Look, QR codes. So, let me take the bigger question and then drill down into finance. So the real question is, what can't you do with a QR code? So
That's a better question. Yes.
if you live in Shanghai, there's a QR code for everything. You want to rent a bicycle, there's a QR code. You want to pay for parking for your car, there's a QR code. It brings this bridge between the physical world and digital payment, and you can stick a QR code virtually anywhere on anything, products. So great. Okay, that's nice. So you can print them in magazines. So you can put them on the internet. They're ubiquitous. There's just no place that doesn't have a QR code on it for some service. So the next question is, so open banking, embedded finance. Oh, so where do you want to embed your QR code? And that's really, so there is no limit to where the imagination can go. So if you want, so people in the West have buy now, pay later. That's that's how we deal with credit at the cash register. So you can imagine a QR code system where, bang, your buy now, pay later company is right there, and you can just imagine that whatever financial service or product can be put into a QR code just about on any internet site, on a payment platform. So why not? It puts payment and finance wherever you are. And look, that's what Alipay fundamentally revolutionized. Now, my example was, I tried to be rather Western to convert it into buy now, pay later. But the reality is that there's an Alipay QR code just about on everywhere. And once you have access to that QR code, you have access to embedded investment, embedded credit, embedded asset management, whatever it is that you want, it's all put onto that platform. It's really quite remarkable, and I don't think the West is going to get there yet, as Alipay has done, but they're looking at the model and they're trying to nudge that direction to the super app as best as they can. And you can see it through PayPal, to a certain degree, Wise now and Klarna. They're all looking to see, well, what more can they do? And QR code will be one way that helps them to get there.
I agree. I do see more wider use cases, if you will. Recently, I was on a plane and we were told to make sure that we load our payments into the airline app, because on the plane, how you pay, they scan the QR code instead of handing them a credit card. So it is gaining popularity over here too, but definitely we are a few years behind, trying to catch up. So before we wrap up, let's look ahead. We did a look back on where it started. So when we close the conversation, let's do a look ahead. What do we have to look forward to, do you think, Richard, in the next few years in the world of payments?
So look, there are sort of three. The singular revolution that's going to happen with QR codes is to make unified our cross-border payment. This is happening. This is not some sort of imaginary, that's coming in 5 years. It's happening now. Singapore has unified QR code payments between one of the major telecom operators in Singapore and Malaysia and India and now to the Philippines. Now, this is sort of a hardwired system that they built in conjunction with Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. Great system, can't say enough good about it. And that's one hardwired solution. And then you've got a different solution, which is in Alipay Plus. Alipay Plus is a Alipay company, so it's a corporate solution that allows the interconnectivity between QR code payments in between nations. And you can do Philippines, a lot of the Southeast Asian nations where there are QR codes, Alipay Plus can now make them interconnected. So I can go to Gcash and I can have a Gcash account in the Philippines and pay on I can't remember the Japanese QR code based system or the fast payment system in Singapore. One payment system unified throughout, and that's happening at multiple levels. As I say, it's happening at telecom provider level, what Singapore has done, and it's happening at the corporate level. And it sounds like sci-fi. Basically, you're going to be able to walk up and say, here's my phone, here's my digital wallet, beep, and the money will come from your bank account in whatever country you originate from, and you'll be traveling. That's a beautiful future. And let me make it clear. Look, I didn't focus on this enough, and I apologize. It's a little bit late, but it's never too late. Western card users must understand QR code payments are inherently low fee, low cost. And with credit cards, you're paying these interchange fees that may be anywhere between 1% and 5%, depending on what country you live in. And they can be very, very expensive. So fundamentally, that guy in the noodle shop is not paying interchange fees, all right? He's not gonna pay that bill. So when we think about this future QR code cross-border transfer world, when I make that payment, I'm not looking for a surprise from my credit card company that said, oh, by the way, in order to make that credit card charge, you've got a surcharge of 5%. Have you ever gotten home and got those, Theo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right? You use your credit card abroad and you're like, well, how did I get hammered on the fees? What happened? So, mobile QR code payments are based on low cost, and they're going to make this global QR swipe to pay system low cost and accessible to all. And that's revolutionary, and it's not something that card companies have really focused on. They're still expensive to use, and the QR code companies are going to basically undercut them. That's going to be one of the issues that card companies are going to have to deal with in our coming digital.
Yeah, I think especially given the current economic conditions, right, that definitely plays a more important factor. And to your question, I think now, instead of a surcharge, they lump it into a quote unquote foreign exchange fee. And somehow magically that fee is a little bit different than what you would expect. So again, it goes back to cost and how you can do things more efficiently. So the future is interesting, and I can't wait to see what's next. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rich. Always a pleasure, and appreciate your insights. And for the rest of our audience, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of AntKast by Ant Group. We'll talk to you next time.